Important topic shortly. Really important topic shortly. I suppose, particularly now with young people going back to school, it's a topic that's important all times of year. But now, I suppose, absolutely, probably a lot of youngsters dreading going back to school. I don't know if there's anything like me when I was at school. I dread this time of year, to be fair. But anyway, let's sort of get nutritionist Natalie Louise Burrows and founder and CEO Sunna in Kampen to give us an insight in terms of what we can do to help look after the well-being of our children, so to speak. So welcome to the show. Great to have you on board. So perhaps we start the nutrition angle, Natalie. Let's sort of go from there. What's your take on it?
Yeah, so thank you very much for having us. I think we can all really appreciate as parents, or when we reflect on our childhood during the summer holidays, a lot of things change and there's a lot more flexibility with the schedule. Some things just completely fly out the window and life can look really different. And we've just had an incredible summer in regards to temperature and weather that's enabled kids to be outside a lot more and a lot later, and has probably disrupted a lot of patterns, particularly around sleep and getting kids to sleep at their usual time, and also sometimes around appetite as well, because the heat can really disrupt how hungry we feel and the times that we want to eat. So as we're thinking about heading back into the school term, whether that's going back into the same school or maybe even going into a new school where there's an additional element of stress and anticipation around it, then we can really start thinking about bringing back in some of those core routines that really not only support the child in how they feel each day, or the teenager and how they feel each day, but also support their body and particularly their immune system to function normally, so that can help them through those first couple of months in school term. Because we see a huge rate, particularly in the adults that we surveyed, of kids becoming ill, especially within that first month of return to school, when they're more compact in a classroom, sharing germs a little bit more easily. So there are definitely some core things we can really consider to do and start doing now, a couple of weeks before term begins. And I'm very happy to dive into them if you want to. We can chat a little bit around some of the stats that we pulled up as tonic.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. Thank you. That'd be really interesting. I mean, like you've mentioned there, there's a routine is a big thing. So obviously, you got the children running outside and playing sports, and there's I suppose they might have some sort of routine, but the sort of freedom of sort of getting up in the morning and not have to sort of get up at a certain time, or generally go to bed at a well, maybe not the same sort of time they would do in the back of school, but there's a lot to take into consideration as well, like you said before. But yeah, that'd be great to sort of share some tips if you can. Fantastic.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. And I think time outside is a massive one that's really important that we continue to do at all times of the year. And especially when the weather's still so great, keeping time outdoors, moving the body really helps to support sleep when the time comes as well, using up that energy so we have really good quality sleep. That's as valuable for adults as it is for children too. But then movement of that blood flow in movement of the body also really helps when it comes to the immune system. So continuing that time outside in a structured way that's going to work with the school day is a really important thing to start considering. Then also thinking about how do we bring that sleep routine back into something a little bit more structured. So what did it look like in the term time before the summer holidays happened? How do we start maybe bringing it in 15 minutes earlier? It might be that you've got a disparity of an hour or two at the moment, and jumping those couple of hours right on the weekend before school starts can be really difficult for children's bodies to adapt to that quickly. Even as an adult, we wouldn't tend to adapt that fast. So starting to think about small increments of 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, slowly bringing bedtimes forward little by little as we have the rundown towards term starting again. And that sleep structure, the body learns when we're expecting it to go to sleep and when we expect it to wake up, but it takes time to learn, which is why starting now is helpful. But when we are asleep, sometimes we think that the child's just resting, there's a bit of peace and quiet, they're resting, getting ready for the next day, but actually their immune system is starting to really build up some infection-fighting proteins during that time of rest. As much as sleep is a really important aspect of our nervous system to help it to move into a calmed state, reduce stress hormones, which might be a little bit more increased if there's a new school element coming in September. And actually, when there is lower levels of stress, then the immune system is able to respond much more positively as well, because high levels of stress really suppress the immune system. So sleep does so much for all beings, but particularly for kids at this time of year too. So that structure can start being considered. And then I wouldn't be a nutritionist without also thinking about the third piece, which is really important, about what is the formation of our meals during the day. What does breakfast, lunch and dinner look like? Where is it potentially slid a little bit and become a bit more flexible? More ice creams, more ice lollies, understandable at this time of year with this sort of heat. But how do we start bringing in a few more structures and concepts around meals that really work with the school day? So what does breakfast begin to look like? What time are we going to start having breakfast? And again, if it's sort of been a little bit later in the day because of how summer holidays have been, don't jump it, but just think about slowly bringing it a little bit earlier. Bring the kids into conversations about what sort of breakfast they quite fancy when the school term starts, and start introducing them slowly and surely, so that by the time school term comes around, they're really familiar with these sorts of meals. And the same can happen with lunch and dinner, really anchoring in those meals and really anchoring the core nutrients as well around good sources of protein in each meal. Lots of fruit and veg. So many children aren't reaching their 5 a day at the moment. So what fruit can they have in breakfast? What 2 pieces of veg in lunch and 2 pieces in dinner? And you've nailed it. And then also thinking about where we can have those good healthy sources of fats, whether you're cooking with olive oil, whether you're serving up any sort of nuts, seeds, avocados, things like that, with appreciation around school rules with nuts. And then don't miss off the whole grains as well. A good fist-sized portion of whole grains for kids, sweet potatoes, those really love root vegetables that are rich in fibre, really support their energy balance, really support their gut health, and actually really also aid towards good positive sleep patterns too. And that can really start to create a well-rounded routine for the whole family, but the kids are going to really benefit when they go back into school.
Yeah, and absolutely, because there's also the sort of stress of going back to, I suppose, like for the children as well, where if they're going up a year as well, or sort of, it might mean sort of making new friends and people coming and going. So there is that as well. But that's really interesting stuff. I think there's some really, really key takeaways. What's your take on it? So now, where do you sort of stand on all this yourself in terms of, I suppose there's a lot to, I wouldn't say there's a lot to digest, some really, really good sort of key points there, but where do we sort of begin? What would be a good starting point as we start to move now towards the back to school?
Yeah, absolutely. And, as a dad of 2 myself, I've been through this and experienced the pain of catching 4 or 5 colds a winter when I used to work in the city, and what I discovered on my own journey and having built Tonic Health, the vitamin business, was actually just having the right nourishment and the right fuel and the right micronutrients in your body can help your immune system function properly and as it should, and actually, reduce the likelihoods of you getting so many colds. It can't prevent it entirely at all. I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is a properly fueled and nourished immune system works better than one that isn't. And, in our research where we found 47% of parents weren't even aware that the NHS recommends all kids should be taking a proper dose of 10 micrograms of vitamin D, not just through the winter, but actually all year round. And so what we see is a lot of parents getting ready for schools with lunch boxes and pencil cases and uniforms and backpacks and what they need to do. But actually, this September period is a really key moment for our kids' immune system, and nourishing their little bodies with the right vitamin will actually help support that immune system do its job and hopefully minimize the amount of impact that whole back to school transition has on the kids, but also on the whole family.
Yeah, and absolutely. I must admit, sort of, in my experience, if my sort of children, some of the points that you've made, they've certainly taken into consideration in terms of activity, eating well, trying to get the balance, getting a balance there. I mean, going back to what you said before, Natalie, I think sort of getting that balance is important. What you mentioned before, during the holidays, might have a few ice creams, maybe the occasional sort of takeaway here and there, but making a conscious effort to sort of eat well, food with high nutrition as well, and obviously sort of like, where necessary. Obviously, so like you mentioned that the NHS there, sort of around the vitamin D. But when we get into sort of winter months as well, that's probably more prominent. Natalie, what's your take on it as a sort of nutrition perspective? I mean, what are things that we can do nutritionally as well, that as well as sort of supplementing it? But what's your take on sort of getting the right vitamins and nutrients, especially for sort of growing children, of any age, but when they sort of grow into teenage years and they start eating more and all things sort of, hormonal changes. What's your take on making sure they get the right nutrients?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where my child is now. He's a teenager, and you suddenly start realizing that they start making their own decisions outside of the home as well, that you have to mop up when they're back in the home. And these sorts of things can feel really tricky and sometimes feel overwhelming. So do just take it one step at a time. I think when it comes to making sure the kids have got all of the nutrients that they need, exactly what Sunna said there, like the immune system, in order for it to function normally, is going to really rely on vitamins and minerals to do its job, and the gut is so important in that role as well. So making sure we've got good fibre to feed the microbiome in our gut so that can support our immune system is vital. Creating that balanced diet across the 3 meals a day, thinking about where you're getting your vitamins and minerals, which so much of that is going to come in the fruits and vegetables that we eat. Some of it's going to come in the whole grains that we have, and then proteins are going to provide those important amino acids, which are building blocks for practically everything we do. So that balance doesn't just sound nice or look particularly nice on a plate. It's really functional to how the body then supports us in going about our everyday life. And there are really sneaky ways of doing it. Sometimes with children, I know Sunna and I have spoken about this a lot. With kids, they can go through fussy phases where they just want everything that looks very beige. So finding ways to hide vegetables in kids' meals can be such an easy win. How do we literally blitz up vegetables, broccoli, courgette, peppers, so tiny that the kids don't know that you've snuck them into the bolognese, and then you're winning, you've ticked a huge box, and the kids are really enjoying their meal, and there isn't an argument at the dinner table. How do you also just start an open conversation about trying new things? And as parents, we've got to lead in being experimental and curious, and just keep going at it and letting kids watch us so that they learn from us as well. But then I think it's important to appreciate that with something like vitamin D, the biggest source that we have of that is from the sun. We've got some foods, eggs, oily fish. Not that many kids eat oily fish. There's over 80% of kids that don't eat any fish at all. But, eggs, oily fish, and a little bit of dairy, some fortified foods are going to carry some form of vitamin D, but they very rarely reach the adequate amount that we need each day. And when the sun does go, when we think about the clocks going back in October and then them springing forward in April, that's a really key season for us to think about supplementing across the whole family. And then, as Sunna said, for ages 1 to 4, supplementing all year round as well. So that's something that needs to be brought in as an addition, because getting that in food is going to be difficult.
Yeah, and absolutely. I think it's really interesting, and sort of, absolutely I think you've mentioned there about sort of leading by example. Certainly I sort of have my, big smoothies every day, and I've got sort of my cocktail of vitamins I take, and I'm out every day for a couple of hour walk. I suppose the thing is, and I know we're sort of short for time now, it's kind of like adjusting that, for say a teenager, obviously sort of like, they're not going to have a huge smoothie like I'll have, but saying, okay, can we make a variation for them and maybe make it more palatable and that sort of stuff. But with time sort of, beating us, can they go anywhere to people like listening in? Because I'm going to check it out myself. I'm always looking for new ideas. Where can our listeners and myself go to find out some more ideas on sort of research and, just generally ideas? I'm always looking to gain new ideas as well.
Yeah, so @Tonic Health is on Instagram, Facebook, tonichealth.co on the website as well. And we're actually the largest followed nutrition channel in the UK, sharing all sorts of things, not just about vitamins, but actually simple ways to make health easier, hide veg in your kids' food, and simple back to school lunchbox tips and other things. Because really, I think that the biggest thing about health is actually making small, sustainable swaps that you can actually integrate into your life and stick to, rather than making health this complicated, overpriced diet plan that in reality everyone's going to stick to for a few weeks and then give up on. So it's all about little sustainable swaps so that you can just inch by inch make you and your family a bit healthier.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So that's really interesting. I'll definitely check it out myself for sure. And I think it's always good to get some sort of new ideas. Absolutely. I think that it's great. Really informative speaking to both of you this morning. So thanks again for your time, and have a great week. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you, Jimmy.